The morning sky above Earth turned dark as 300 alien ships appeared from nowhere. Each ship was massive, bigger than any city humans had ever built. They moved slowly through space, blocking out the sun as they took positions around the planet. People across the world stopped what they were doing and looked up at the sky in fear and wonder. Admiral Jake Morrison stood in the control room of Luna Base on the moon. He was a tall man with gray hair and tired eyes that had seen many battles. Through the large windows, he watched the alien fleet arrange itself in perfect formation. His hands remained steady on the control panel even though his heart was beating fast. He had been preparing for this day his entire military career. Down on Earth, President Lisa Carter was rushed into the emergency bunker beneath Washington. She was a strong woman who had led her country through many crises, but nothing like this. The phone call started immediately. World leaders from every nation wanted to know what America planned to do. The Secretary of Defense burst through the door with reports flooding in from military bases around the world. The alien ships were unlike anything humans had ever seen. They were dark and angular, covered in strange symbols that glowed with purple light. No weapons were visible on the outside, but everyone could feel the threat they represented. Scientists at observatories around the world trained their telescopes on the fleet, trying to understand what they were facing. Dr. Peter Collins sat in his laboratory at the Space Research Center, studying the first images of the alien vessels. He was a quiet man who had spent his life studying the possibility of life beyond Earth. His hands shook as he examined the detailed photographs. These ships showed technology far beyond human understanding. The metal they were made from reflected light in ways that seemed impossible. The energy signatures coming from their engines were massive. 3 hours after their arrival, the aliens sent their first message. Every radio, television, and communication device on Earth received the same transmission at the same time. The voice that spoke was cold and mechanical, clearly using some kind of translation system. The words came through clearly in every human language. People of Earth, we are the HFY Empire. We have traveled across the galaxy, bringing order to 47 star systems. Each world we have visited has chosen to join our empire peacefully after seeing our power. We offer you the same choice. The message continued with details that made every human leader go pale with fear. The HFY described their weapons that could destroy entire continents with single shots. They showed brief images of dead worlds, burned and lifeless, where civilizations had chosen to fight instead of surrender. The pictures were terrible to see. You have 72 hours to make your decision. Surrender completely, and your people will be allowed to live under our rule. Choose to resist and your world will be destroyed completely. No ships will escape. No cities will survive. This is not a negotiation. This is the same offer we have given to every world we have conquered. President Carter gathered her emergency council in the Situation Room. Military generals sat next to scientists and diplomats, all trying to understand what options Earth had. General Bob Clark, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, spread satellite images across the table showing the alien fleet's positions. Every major population center on Earth was within range of their weapons. Madam President, General Clark said, his voice grim, our analysis shows their ships carry enough firepower to turn every major city to glass. We've run simulations with our best weapons systems. Nothing we have can penetrate their shields or match their destructive capability. Secretary of State Helen Wright leaned forward, studying intelligence reports from deep space monitoring stations. We've been tracking signals from other star systems for decades. The reports match what they're telling us. 47 civilizations have fallen to this empire. None of them lasted more than a week after the ultimatum was given. Dr. Collins entered the room carrying a tablet full of data. His face was serious as he shared what his team had discovered. The energy readings from their ships are beyond our current understanding of physics. Each vessel generates more power than our largest nuclear plants. If they're telling the truth about their weapons, resistance would be suicide. Admiral Morrison's voice came through the communication system from Luna Base. I'm seeing more ships arriving every hour. They're taking positions at every major satellite and space station. They want to make sure nothing leaves Earth without their permission. President Carter stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights below. Millions of people were going about their lives, most still unaware of how serious the threat was. News reports were just beginning to break the story to the public. Soon panic would spread across the world. What do we know about the civilizations that surrendered? She asked. Dr. Collins checked his notes. From what we can tell, they were allowed to continue existing but under complete control. Their resources, their technology, their people, all became property of the HFY Empire. It's not death, but it's not freedom either. The room fell silent as everyone considered the choice facing humanity. Surrender meant losing everything that made them human. Fighting meant certain death for billions of people. There seemed to be no third option. Outside the bunker, normal life continued for a few more hours. People went to work, children played in parks, and traffic moved through busy streets. But slowly, as news of the alien ultimatum spread, everything began to change. Stores ran out of food as people panic-bought supplies. Highways became clogged with cars as families tried to reach each other. Prayer services filled churches, mosques, and temples as people sought comfort in their faith. Admiral Morrison watched it all from the moon. He could see the lights of Earth's cities twinkling in the darkness so beautiful and fragile. The alien ships hung in space like dark clouds waiting for humanity's answer. In 72 hours, everything would change forever. As the first day ended, President Carter made her first public address to the world. Standing behind the presidential podium, she looked directly into the cameras and spoke to every person on Earth. My fellow humans, we face the greatest challenge in our species' history. An alien empire has given us an ultimatum. In the next 3 days, we must decide the future of our world. But remember this, we are not the first to face this choice, and we will not face it alone. While world leaders held emergency meetings and the media showed panic in the streets, Colonel Amy Rodriguez was already moving through underground tunnels that most people never knew existed. Deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, she walked quickly through corridors carved from solid rock. Her boots echoed against the metal floors as she headed toward the most classified facility in human history. Project Nightfall had been running in secret for 50 years. It started when scientists first detected strange signals from deep space that didn't match any natural phenomenon. The signals suggested intelligent life was moving between star systems, and some of those signals carried disturbing messages about conquered worlds and destroyed civilizations. Dr. Kevin Martinez sat in his office surrounded by files marked with the highest security classifications. He was a man who studied how different species thought and behaved when facing extreme danger. For decades, he had been collecting information from the few refugees who had escaped from worlds conquered by the HFY Empire. What he learned had changed everything humans thought they knew about survival. Colonel Rodriguez, Dr. Martinez said as she entered his office, the psychological profiles are complete. Every species that faced this ultimatum followed the same pattern. They tried to negotiate. They looked for compromise. They believed that reason and logic would save them from a superior force. Amy Rodriguez sat down and opened the thick folder he handed her. Inside were detailed studies of 47 different alien civilizations. Each one had received the same 72-hour ultimatum. Each one had responded in predictable ways, and each one had been completely destroyed when their rational approaches failed. What made them all think the same way? She asked. Dr. Martinez pulled out charts showing brain scans and behavioral analysis. Evolution shaped them differently than us. When they faced overwhelming threats, their survival instinct was to submit and preserve whatever they could. It worked against natural predators and environmental disasters, but it made them vulnerable to the HFY. Captain Nicole Brooks was coordinating with resistance cells that had been forming across every continent for decades. These weren't military units wearing uniforms. They were ordinary people who had been quietly preparing for the unthinkable. Teachers who knew how to organize communities. Engineers who understood infrastructure systems. Farmers who could keep people fed during emergencies. Students who could adapt quickly to changing situations. The resistance network communicated through systems that looked like normal internet traffic, but carried hidden messages. Grocery stores that served as supply depots. Schools that were actually training centers. Libraries that contained more than just books. Every major city had these hidden networks, but they were so well disguised that even most government officials didn't know they existed. Commander Ryan Phillips worked in a facility that monitored all communications between the HFY ships. His team of linguists and codebreakers had been studying alien languages for years, preparing for exactly this situation. What they discovered in the intercepted transmission sent chills through everyone who read the reports. The aliens were already dividing Earth's resources among themselves. They discussed which continents would provide the best mining opportunities. They planned which human cities to keep as administrative centers and which ones to destroy as examples. They talked about Earth's population like livestock, calculating how many humans would be useful as workers and how many were excess. "They're completely confident that we'll surrender," Commander Phillips reported to Colonel Rodriguez. "Their communications show no concern about resistance. They're treating this as a routine conquest, just like all the others." Lieutenant Sophie Davis was responsible for the most secret part of Project Nightfall. Hidden throughout Earth's solar system were communication arrays that had taken decades to build and position. Most looked like space debris or abandoned satellites, but they were actually powerful transmitters capable of sending messages across the galaxy. The arrays had been collecting intelligence from refugee groups hiding in distant star systems. Dr. Martinez had been right about one thing. The Kethvar had conquered 47 worlds, but they hadn't actually destroyed all the people who lived there. Many had escaped and were living in hiding, afraid to fight back because they thought they were alone. Colonel Rodriguez walked through the main control room of Project Nightfall, watching hundreds of specialists work at their stations. Computer screens showed tactical information, communication intercepts, and real-time updates from resistance cells around the world. Everyone in the facility knew that the next 3 days would determine humanity's fate. "Dr. Martinez," she said, "tell me about the one thing that makes humans different." He pulled up brain scans showing human neural patterns compared to the 47 conquered species. Every other intelligent species developed a submission response to overwhelming odds. When faced with certain death, their instinct is to surrender and hope for survival. Humans evolved differently. The scans showed unique patterns in human brain activity when facing impossible situations. Instead of triggering submission responses, extreme threats activated different neural pathways. Humans became more aggressive when cornered, more creative when faced with problems, and more united when threatened by outside forces. "The Kethvar have never encountered a species that gets stronger under pressure," Dr. Martinez explained. "They built their entire conquest strategy on the assumption that overwhelming force leads to submission. That assumption has never been tested. Captain Brooks received reports from resistance cells across the globe. In New York, emergency supplies had been secretly moved into underground storage facilities. In London, communication networks independent of normal infrastructure were ready to activate. In Tokyo, evacuation routes that looked like subway tunnels could move entire neighborhoods to safety within hours. The preparation had taken decades because it required changing how humans thought about survival. Instead of depending on governments and military forces to protect them, ordinary people had been trained to take care of themselves and their communities. Every neighborhood had people who knew how to generate power, grow food, provide medical care, and maintain security. Commander Phillips discovered something that changed everything they thought they knew about the Kethvar Empire. The communications between alien ships revealed that many of their previous conquests had been exaggerated. They had attacked mostly empty worlds or civilizations that were already dying from natural disasters. "Colonel," he reported, "I think they've been lying about their military success. Most of the species on their conquest list were either evacuated before the attacks or were already extinct. They've been building their reputation on destroying empty planets and broadcasting false victory reports." The revelation was shocking but made perfect sense. The Kethvar maintained control through fear and intimidation, rather than actual military superiority. They had never learned how to fight a real war, because they had never encountered a species that refused to surrender. As the second day of the ultimatum began, President Carter was briefed on Project Nightfall for the first time. She sat in the underground command center, listening to Colonel Rodriguez explain 50 years of secret preparation. The scope of what had been hidden from public knowledge was overwhelming. "Madam President," Colonel Rodriguez said, "we have one advantage the Kethvar don't know about. They expect us to behave like every other species they've encountered. They expect us to try negotiating, to look for compromise, to eventually submit when we realize resistance is hopeless." President Carter looked at the displays showing resistance networks around the world, hidden communication systems, and detailed psychological profiles of humanity's enemies. "What do you recommend, Colonel?" "We do something no other species has ever done, Madam President. We refuse to accept their ultimatum. We don't surrender and we don't just resist. We go on the offensive." The 72-hour deadline arrived like a storm everyone could see coming, but no one could stop. Around the world, people gathered in their homes, in public squares, and in places of worship, waiting to hear what their leaders would decide. The Kethvar fleet hung motionless in space above Earth, their dark ships blocking out portions of the sky like permanent eclipse. President Carter stood in the broadcasting studio deep beneath the White House. Camera. Crews had been working through the night to set up the equipment that would carry her message to every corner of the world and beyond. Colonel Rodriguez stood beside her, along with the key members of Project Nightfall who had spent decades preparing for this moment. Fleet Commander Zexthol waited in his command ship, confident that the humans would follow the same pattern as every other species he had conquered. His war council had reviewed the behavioral profiles of the previous 47 civilizations. Each one had spent their final hours either begging for mercy or making desperate last-minute military preparations that were doomed to fail. The Kethvar had perfected their conquest strategy over centuries. The 72-hour ultimatum was designed to give civilizations enough time to understand the hopelessness of their situation. Most species used that time to exhaust themselves in pointless negotiations or futile military preparations. By the time the deadline arrived, they were psychologically broken and ready to surrender. President Carter looked directly into the cameras as the countdown reached 0. Across the galaxy, the hidden communication arrays that Lieutenant Sophie Davis had positioned began broadcasting on frequencies that would reach not just the Kethvar fleet, but every star system where refugees from conquered worlds might be hiding. Commander Zexthol and the forces of the Kethvar Empire, she began, her voice steady and clear. We have received your ultimatum. We understand that you have given this same choice to 47 other civilizations. We know that each of them chose either surrender or destruction. The alien commander leaned forward in his chair, expecting to hear Earth's surrender. His tactical officers prepared to begin the administrative process of taking control of another world. The Kethvar had developed efficient systems for managing newly conquered populations. However, President Carter continued, we reject both of your options. We do not choose surrender and we do not choose destruction. We offer you a third choice that no species has ever presented to your empire. Commander Zexthol felt something he had never experienced during a conquest: confusion. In all their military manuals, there were only two possible responses to their ultimatum. Civilizations either submitted to preserve their lives or fought to preserve their freedom. Both responses led to Kethvar victory, just through different methods. We choose resistance, President Carter said, but not the kind of resistance you have faced before. We invite you to leave our solar system immediately. If you choose to attack our world, you will discover why Earth has never been successfully conquered by any force in the galaxy. The transmission continued, but now it was no longer just President Carter speaking. Leaders from every nation on Earth appeared on screen, each speaking in their own language but delivering the same message. The United Front was something the Kethvar had never encountered. Usually, conquered worlds were divided by politics, religion, or territorial disputes that made them easy to control. Admiral Morrison activated additional communication systems from Luna Base. The message was being sent not just to the Kethvar fleet, but broadcast across every frequency that could reach beyond Earth's solar system. Hidden receivers on refugee ships throughout the galaxy would pick up the transmission and relay it further. Dr. Martinez had been right about human psychology. The threat of total destruction hadn't broken humanity's will to resist. Instead, it had united every nation, culture, and individual on the planet under a single purpose. The aliens had given Earth exactly what it needed: a common enemy that made all human conflicts seem trivial by comparison. Commander Zexthol consulted with his war council, reviewing their databases of conquered worlds. No species had ever issued a counter-ultimatum. The closest thing to resistance had been desperate military attacks that were easily defeated by superior Kethvar technology. What the humans were doing fell outside all their tactical models. Captain Brooks activated resistance networks across Earth that revealed the true scope of humanity's preparation. Major cities that appeared to be normal were actually elaborate defensive positions. Transportation systems that looked like ordinary roads and railways were designed to move populations quickly to safety. Buildings that seemed like regular offices and apartment complexes could be converted into fortress positions within hours. The Kethvar tactical analysis systems couldn't understand what they were seeing. Human military forces appeared weak and disorganized, just like every other species they had conquered. But there were patterns in human infrastructure that didn't match the profiles of previous civilizations. Every major population center had redundant systems, hidden supply networks, and evacuation routes that suggested long-term planning for exactly this scenario. Commander Phillips revealed the most shocking part of humanity's response. The communication arrays were not just broadcasting Earth's message to the galaxy. They were also receiving replies. For the first time in decades, resistance movements on supposedly conquered worlds were breaking their silence and responding to the call. The first responses came from the Kepler system, where survivors of the 32nd world conquered by the Kethvar had been hiding in asteroid mining stations for 15 years. Their message was brief but clear. Earth is not alone. We stand with you. Similar messages began arriving from throughout the galaxy. The Vega refugees who had escaped before their world was destroyed. The survivors from the Centauri colonies who had been thought extinct. Underground resistance movements from dozens of star systems that the Kethvar believed were completely under their control. Dr. Collins had been monitoring the alien fleet's internal communications, and what he discovered changed everything they understood about their enemies. The Kethvar ships were sending urgent requests for reinforcements, psychological evaluation teams, and guidance from their homeworld. They had never faced a situation where their standard conquest protocols didn't work. Colonel Rodriguez, Dr. Collins reported, their communication patterns show increasing stress indicators. The ship commanders are requesting permission to begin immediate attacks, rather than waiting for surrender. They're not following their normal procedures. The psychological pressure was working in reverse from what the Kethvar intended. Instead of humanity breaking down under the threat of destruction, the aliens were showing signs of panic when faced with unexpected resistance. Their entire military culture was built on the assumption that overwhelming force led to immediate submission. Lieutenant Davis revealed that the communication network was picking up internal Kethvar messages between their ships and distant command centers. The fleet above Earth was not operating with full autonomy. They were part of a larger empire that controlled them through fear and rigid hierarchy, just like they controlled conquered species. President Carter's second transmission came 12 hours after the deadline had passed. This time she wasn't just speaking to the Kethvar fleet above Earth. She was addressing every hidden resistance movement throughout the galaxy that was listening to the broadcast. To our brothers and sisters, hiding among the stars, she said, you are not alone and you are not forgotten. The time for hiding is over. The Kethvar Empire built their power on lies and fear. They convinced you that resistance was hopeless because you thought you were the only ones fighting. The message continued with detailed intelligence about Kethvar weaknesses that had been gathered over decades of secret observation, information about their ship designs, their military hierarchies, their supply lines, and most importantly, their psychological dependence on easy victories over helpless opponents. Commander Zexthol realized that something unprecedented was happening. The humans had not only refused to surrender, they had somehow coordinated with resistance movements across the entire galaxy. The Kethvar Empire was facing the first organized, multi-species rebellion in their history. As the first day after the deadline ended, reports began reaching the fleet that uprisings were breaking out on worlds they thought were securely conquered. The humans had done something no other species had ever managed. They had turned the Kethvar's own conquest strategy against them. The Kethvar response was swift and brutal. Commander Zexthol ordered his fleet to demonstrate their power by targeting major population centers with their planet-killer weapons. Massive energy beams struck New York, London, Tokyo, and 12 other major cities around the world. The explosions were visible from space as mushroom clouds rose above the impact sites. But something unprecedented happened that confused every alien observer. Instead of panic and surrender, the attack seemed to make humans more determined. Television broadcasts from around the world showed not devastation and crying civilians, but organized evacuation efforts and communities coming together to help each other. Captain Brooks smiled as she watched the Kethvar weapons strike the carefully prepared decoy targets. For months, the resistance networks had been moving people out of major cities through underground tunnel systems that took them to safety zones in rural areas and underground facilities. The massive casualties the aliens expected were actually sophisticated, holograms and explosive devices designed to make their weapons appear effective. The real populations of the targeted cities were already safe in hidden locations that had been prepared for decades. Schools, hospitals, and residential areas that appeared to be destroyed were actually empty buildings filled with equipment that created realistic explosions and smoke effects. The Kethvar had unknowingly participated in the largest magic show in human history. Admiral Morrison coordinated the next phase of the deception from Luna Base. Hidden cameras throughout the cities showed the aliens conducting damage assessment with their scanner systems. The Kethvar were detecting exactly what humans wanted them to detect: massive destruction, infrastructure collapse, and what appeared to be millions of casualties. Commander Phillips had been studying Kethvar psychology for years, and he understood exactly how their minds worked. They expected their displays of power to break human resistance within hours. When the fake casualty reports matched their predictions, they assumed their conquest strategy was working as planned. Dr. Collins made contact with underground resistance movements on supposedly conquered worlds throughout the galaxy. The communication arrays that Lieutenant Davis had positioned were receiving detailed intelligence from species the Kethvar claimed to have completely destroyed decades. The Altair refugees had been living in hidden space stations for 30 years, developing new technologies while the Kethvar thought their world was empty. The Procyon survivors had established secret colonies on moons throughout their system, slowly building the infrastructure they would need to reclaim their home world. The Rigel resistance had been infiltrating Kethvar supply lines for 20 years, gathering intelligence about their enemies' real capabilities. Colonel Rodriguez, Dr. Collins reported, "We're getting information that changes everything we thought we knew about the Kethvar Empire. Most of their previous conquests were against worlds that were already dying or evacuated. They've been building their reputation by destroying empty planets and broadcasting false victory reports." The revelation was shocking, but made perfect sense when combined with the intelligence they had gathered about Kethvar psychology. The aliens maintained control through fear and intimidation, rather than genuine military superiority. They had never learned how to fight a real war because they had never encountered a species that refused to be intimidated. Captain Andy Thompson commanded the stealth ship Aurora, which had been observing the alien fleet from close range for weeks without being detected. His analysis revealed critical weaknesses that could only be discovered through direct observation. The Kethvar ships were impressive in appearance but poorly maintained. Their hulls showed signs of metal fatigue from decades of use without proper repairs. Their energy systems fluctuated in ways that suggested overworked reactors. Their weapons were powerful but required long charging periods between shots. Most importantly, their crews showed signs of severe psychological stress when faced with genuine resistance. Admiral Morrison, Captain Thompson reported, "These ships are not the invincible war machines they appear to be. They're held together with spare parts and desperation. Their crews are terrified of fighting a real battle because they've never had to do it before." The psychological warfare was working better than anyone had hoped. The Kethvar had built their entire military culture around easy victories against helpless opponents. When faced with resistance that didn't follow their predicted patterns, their command structure began showing signs of breakdown. Lieutenant Davis intercepted communications between Kethvar ships that revealed growing panic among their officers. Ship commanders were requesting permission to retreat. Crew members were questioning orders that seemed to lead toward actual combat. The rigid hierarchy that held their empire together was starting to crack under the pressure of unexpected resistance. Dr. Martinez had been right about the fundamental difference between humans and other species. Every civilization the Kethvar had conquered developed submission responses when faced with overwhelming threats. But humans had evolved differently. Extreme danger activated different neural pathways that made them more creative, more aggressive, and more united. The galaxy-wide resistance network that had been activated by Earth's broadcast was proving this point on a massive scale. Species that had hidden in fear for decades were suddenly working together, sharing technology and intelligence, coordinating attacks across multiple star systems. The Kethvar Empire was facing simultaneous uprisings everywhere at once. Commander Zexthol received reports that made his worst fears come true. The Kepler system resistance had destroyed 3 Kethvar supply ships using weapons that shouldn't exist. The Vega refugees had captured a patrol fleet intact and were broadcasting detailed technical information about Kethvar ship designs to every resistance group in the galaxy. The Centauri underground had emerged from hiding and reclaimed their homeworld in a perfectly coordinated attack that suggested they had been planning it for years. Similar reports were coming in from star systems throughout the Empire. Worlds that had been considered pacified for decades were suddenly in open rebellion. President Carter made her third broadcast to the galaxy, but this time she wasn't just speaking to resistance movements. She was addressing the HFY Empire directly, offering them information they had never possessed about their own situation. Commander Zexthol and the HFY High Command, she said, your empire was built on a lie. You convinced yourselves that you were superior conquerors, but you never actually conquered anyone. You attacked empty worlds, destroyed evacuated cities, and declared victory over opponents who had already left. The broadcast continued with detailed intelligence about HFY operations throughout the galaxy, information that could only have been gathered through decades of careful observation and analysis. Technical specifications for their ships, personnel records of their commanders, supply routes and communication networks that were supposedly secret. You have spent centuries avoiding real combat, President Carter continued. Your ships are poorly maintained because you never expected to use them in actual battles. Your crews are undertrained because they never faced genuine resistance. Your command structure is rigid and fragile because it was designed to manage conquered populations, not to coordinate military operations. Admiral Morrison revealed the most devastating piece of intelligence. The hidden communication arrays had been intercepting messages between the HFY fleet and their home world. The Empire was not as vast and powerful as they claimed. Their home system was actually quite small, with a population that had been declining for generations. The HFY had become dependent on resources from conquered worlds because their own civilization was slowly dying. The aggressive expansion across the galaxy was not a sign of strength, but a desperate attempt to find new sources of energy, materials, and even population to sustain their failing empire. Captain Brooks activated the final phase of Earth's resistance network. What the HFY thought were destroyed cities suddenly came back to life. Hidden power systems activated. Concealed defense installations rose from underground positions. Transport networks that had appeared to be damaged began moving people and equipment at incredible speed. The aliens realized they had been completely deceived. The human casualties they thought they had inflicted were illusions. The infrastructure they believed they had destroyed was hidden beneath decoy installations. The broken resistance they expected to see was actually a coordinated defense network that had been preparing for this moment for decades. Commander Zexthol received the final intelligence report that broke his confidence completely. The resistance movements throughout the galaxy were not responding to Earth's call for help. They had been secretly coordinating with human agents for years, waiting for the signal to begin a galaxy-wide rebellion against the HFY Empire. Earth hadn't just defended itself against invasion. Humanity had organized and launched the largest military operation in galactic history, turning every conquered world into a battlefield and every HFY advantage into a liability. President Carter made a decision that changed the course of galactic history. Instead of continuing to defend Earth, humanity would go on the offensive. She stood in the command center of Project Nightfall, surrounded by screens showing resistance movements across the galaxy that were ready to follow Earth's lead into battle. Colonel Rodriguez, she said, activate Operation Liberation. It's time to show the galaxy what humans do when we stop hiding. Throughout Earth's solar system, ships that had been concealed for decades began emerging from their hiding places. These weren't the primitive vessels the HFY expected to face. For 50 years, humanity had been developing technology specifically designed to counter everything the aliens could deploy. Captain Linda Evans commanded the flagship Defiance as it rose from a hidden base beneath the Pacific Ocean. The ship looked strange compared to human designs from the past. Its hull was made from materials that absorbed energy weapons rather than reflecting them. Its engines used principles that human scientists had learned from studying HFY technology captured by resistance movements. Admiral Morrison watched from Luna Base as more ships appeared around Earth. They came from underground facilities, from asteroid mining stations, from bases hidden on the far side of the moon. Each one had been built using knowledge gathered from 47 different alien civilizations that had shared their technology with human agents over the decades. The HFY fleet found itself surrounded by enemies they had never seen before. Human ships moved with coordination that suggested they had been training together for years. Their weapons were designed specifically to penetrate HFY shields. Their tactics were built around exploiting weaknesses that could only be discovered through careful observation and planning. Commander Zexthol realized that his empire had made a terrible mistake. They had encountered the one species in the galaxy that became stronger under pressure, more united when threatened, and more dangerous when cornered. The HFY had spent centuries avoiding real combat, and now they faced an enemy that thrived on it. Dr. Martinez implemented the final phase of Project Nightfall from his control center, deep beneath the Rocky Mountains. The message broadcast across the galaxy wasn't just a declaration of resistance. It was an activation code that awakened every dormant resistance movement on every supposedly conquered world. The Kepler system erupted in coordinated rebellion as hidden bases launched attacks against HFY occupation forces. The Altair refugees emerged from 30 years of hiding with ships and weapons that had been secretly developed in concealed facilities. The Procyon survivors began reclaiming their homeworld using tactics that had been planned for decades. Within hours, the HFY found themselves facing simultaneous uprisings across their entire empire. Species they thought they had crushed generations ago emerged from hiding with weapons and strategies they had been developing in secret. The galaxy erupted in coordinated rebellion that made the HFY's worst nightmares come true. Captain Brooks coordinated with resistance leaders throughout known space, sharing intelligence and tactical information that allowed each species to attack their local HFY forces at exactly the right moment. The communication network that Lieutenant Davis had built became the nervous system of a galaxy-wide military operation. The psychological impact on HFY forces was devastating. They had built their entire military culture around the assumption that they were superior to every other species in the galaxy. When faced with coordinated resistance from dozens of civilizations working together, their rigid command structure began collapsing under the pressure. Commander Phillips intercepted desperate communications between HFY commanders throughout the galaxy. Ship captains were requesting permission to retreat from battles they had never expected to fight. Ground commanders were reporting that occupied worlds were rising in rebellion faster than they could respond. The Empire was falling apart from within. Captain Thompson's stealth ship, Aurora, provided real-time intelligence about HFY fleet movements around Earth. The alien ships that had seemed so threatening just days before were now trying to maintain defensive formations against human attacks they couldn't predict or counter. Their superior technology meant nothing when they didn't know how to use it in actual combat. Admiral Morrison delivered the final ultimatum to Commander Zexthol as human. Ships surrounded the alien fleet from every direction. The roles had been completely reversed from just a few days earlier. Now it was humanity offering terms to a defeated enemy. Commander Zexthol, Admiral Morrison broadcast on all frequencies. Your empire built its power on lies and fear. You conquered civilizations that chose submission over extinction. You destroyed empty worlds and called yourselves warriors. You ruled through intimidation rather than strength. The human fleet held position around the HFY ships, demonstrating that they could destroy the alien force whenever they chose. But instead of attacking, they waited. The psychological pressure of being surrounded by enemies was having exactly the effect that Dr. Martinez had predicted. But humans choose a different path, Admiral Morrison continued. We choose to fight until fighting is no longer possible. We choose to unite against threats rather than surrender to them. We choose to help others who cannot help themselves rather than exploit their weakness. Reports from throughout the galaxy confirmed that the rebellion was succeeding beyond anyone's wildest hopes. The Rigel system had driven out its HFY occupiers completely. The Canopus resistance had captured an entire HFY battle fleet intact. The Sirius Underground had taken control of the main communication hub that coordinated alien operations across 3 star sectors. President Carter addressed the galaxy one final time, but now she was speaking to free civilizations rather than hidden resistance movements. The HFY empire was crumbling as worlds throughout known space declared their independence and began working together to build something better. People of the galaxy, she said, today we have learned that the strongest weapon in the universe is not technology or superior numbers. The strongest weapon is the refusal to surrender in the face of impossible odds. The refusal to accept that might makes right. The refusal to believe that some species are born to rule, while others are born to serve. The broadcast was being received on hundreds of worlds that were celebrating their freedom for the first time in decades. Species that had been hiding in fear were emerging to reclaim their home systems. Civilizations that thought they were alone were discovering they were part of a galactic community that had been waiting for the chance to stand together. Commander Zexthol made the hardest decision of his career. His fleet was surrounded and outnumbered. His empire was in rebellion across every star system. His people were calling for peace negotiations rather than continued fighting. The HFY way of war had failed completely when faced with genuine resistance. Admiral Morrison, he broadcast to the human fleet, the HFY Empire formally requests terms for surrender. We acknowledge that our conquest was built on deception and intimidation rather than legitimate military superiority. We are prepared to withdraw from all occupied systems and make reparations to the civilizations we have wronged. The alien fleet began powering down its weapons and withdrawing from Earth's solar system, but the galaxy-wide rebellion they had triggered would continue hunting them until every occupied world was free. The HFY had learned too late that some species could not be conquered, only awakened to their own strength. As the last alien ship disappeared into hyperspace, President Carter looked out at the stars from the observation deck of the space station that would become the headquarters of the new Galactic Alliance. Representatives from dozens of worlds were already requesting permission to visit Earth and meet the species that had liberated them all. Admiral Morrison, she said as they watched ships from across the galaxy beginning to arrive. I think we're going to need a bigger welcome committee.